The cabin door shattered with a crack like a cannon blast through a century-old oak. I nearly dropped my coffee, too stunned to even swear. Splinters sprayed across the hardwood floor, the bookshelves, and even into my guest's mug. Every deer in the Blackridge Mountains must have bolted. Nothing could have prepared me for what stormed through that wrecked doorway next. Margaret Voss, our HOA chairwoman, stood there like she'd just crashed a bulldozer, gripping a crowbar in one manicured hand. Her face was flushed with a mix of righteous fury and pure madness. She aimed that crowbar at me like a lance, bellowing, "Got you, Nathan Lee. You thought you could dodge the HOA, but your game's over." She spat the last word like it burned her tongue. I'd seen Margaret mad at HOA meetings before Simone's mailbox an inch too high misses. Carter's rogue tulips, but this was unhinged, next-level chaos. Let me tell you, nothing shatters your mountain retreat fantasy faster than a middle-aged woman in a designer suit swinging a crowbar in your living room. I'd inherited this cabin from my grandmother, Ellen, dreaming it'd be my escape from city chaos and demanding clients. Never imagined I'd be dealing with an HOA president staging a home invasion up here. But Margaret didn't know I wasn't alone. Behind me, calm as ever at my oak dining table, sat Judge Abigail Thornton, my grandmother's old friend. The kind of woman who could hush a courtroom with a single raised eyebrow. She wore a charcoal sweater and an unshakable air of authority. She'd come up for a quiet weekend, talking pie recipes and retirement plans. When Margaret burst in, Abigail just looked up, sipped her coffee, and said, "Margaret Voss," in that deadly judge's tone that makes grown men rethink their lives. She didn't raise her voice or set her cup down, just that voice. Margaret went pale as my best linens. The crowbar hit the floor with a clang that echoed like a gunshot. One moment she's ready to take my head off over a supposed fence violation, the next she's a kid caught stealing. "Judge Thornton," she stammered. "This is just routine HOA enforcement. Nathan's been flouting regulations." Abigail gave her that look, the one that makes you want to dive out the nearest window. Meanwhile, I quietly thumbed my phone, knowing this was going to be worth recording. But I wasn't the only one with history here. 8 years ago, Abigail had dismantled Margaret's legal career in a courtroom clash nobody forgot. Now, they were face to face again, surrounded by the splinters of my grandmother's door. Abigail stood, slow and deliberate, like a gunslinger in an old western, mug still in hand, looking like she'd been waiting for this rematch. Margaret seemed ready to flee. "You were always impulsive, Margaret," Abigail said. "But breaking down doors with a crowbar? That's a new low even for you." Not cruel, just disappointed. Margaret flinched like she'd been struck. This wasn't just an HOA dispute, Anna Maria, it was decades of bad blood boiling over. She tried again, hands flapping, rattling off numbers. 52 infractions. Legal authority as chairwoman. But she sounded absurd, and she knew it. Abigail stepped closer, and Margaret backed into the shattered doorframe, still trying to justify herself to the one person who'd never buy it. "Do any of these so-called infractions involve actual violations of law?" Abigail asked. "Or are you just using HOA rules to bully people who don't cave?" That's when it clicked. My grandmother always said this cabin was special, built in 1952, protected somehow. I bolted to her file cabinet, digging until I found a thick manila folder. Property rights, historical designation, 1952 Blackridge Historical Protection Agreement. "Margaret," I said, "this place is exempt from HOA rules. Has been for over 70 years. Her face, already pale, looked like it might dissolve. But as I read deeper, my stomach twisted. Margaret didn't just want control, she needed this cabin, the final piece of a nasty puzzle. It all came together. After Abigail tanked Margaret's career, she didn't fade away. She moved to Blackridge Estates, rewrote the bylaws, and started snapping up vulnerable properties over 12 years, using every loophole and intimidation tactic she knew. She didn't care about flower beds or fence heights, she wanted the land. My land. The last holdout in her scheme for a luxury resort development. She'd weaponized the HOA like her personal enforcer. That's when my friend Jake rolled up, camera rolling. Right behind him was Detective Paul Callahan, a small-town cop with the tired look of someone who's seen too much HOA drama. He glanced from the smashed door to Margaret to Abigail, his expression begging, "Please, let this be simple." But Margaret wasn't done. She launched into her victim act, claiming I'd threatened her, playing the dutiful chairwoman for Callahan. Abigail leaned forward, voice like a blade. Detective, Mrs. Voss claims she was serving documentation, yet there's no paperwork, just a crowbar and a lot of damage. Is this standard HOA procedure? Callahan fumbled his words, but his eyes betrayed him. Then he cracked, voice low. She threatened my daughter, he admitted. Margaret had dug up where his kid went to school, using his family to force him to back her vendetta against me. That's when my neighbor, sweet old Rose Bennett, shuffled in, flower-loving Rose, pulling a tiny recording device from her pocket. She smiled at Margaret and said, "When the FBI retires you after 30 years of white-collar investigations, you get bored. But when I saw what you were up to, Margaret, I couldn't resist." Rose had been building a case for nearly 2 years, tracking Margaret's property grabs, rigged votes, and shady HOA accounting. The look on Margaret's face was worth every sleepless night I'd had since she moved in. I found another envelope in my grandmother's files, for Nathan, in case of emergency. Inside, a USB packed with years of HOA recordings, receipts, and documents tying Margaret's empire to shell companies and money laundering across 3 counties. We dumped it all on the table, Jake streaming live to his followers. Margaret's phone buzzed, her crisis team barking orders. Play the victim, flood the internet, rewrite the story. Suddenly, we were fighting a war on 2 fronts. Margaret's slick PR machine spinning her as the persecuted defender of order, and Jake's raw footage showing her smashing doors, threatening cops, scheming with contractors, all in high definition for the world to see. Hashtags trended, news crews arrived, neighbors showed up with arms full of old fines and nasty letters Margaret had sent. Through it all, Abigail read evidence into the camera: fraud, intimidation, embezzlement, you name it. Margaret tried to flip the script, accusing Abigail of bias, claiming some old friendship with my grandmother Ellen made this a personal vendetta. "You're right," Abigail said calmly. "Ellen was my mentor, my family, which is why I retired last week to finish this investigation as a private citizen." Boom. Margaret's last card, dead in her hand. Police cars, feds, neighbors, news vans, me cabin turned into a circus. Everyone had a story. Mrs. Carter's banned roses, the Thompsons' garbage can fines, Callahan's coerced reports. People hugged, cried, took selfies as Margaret was cuffed, and read her rights. Broadcast for nearly 100,000 live viewers. Her PR team vanished. Her paid online army went silent, and neighbors who'd lived in fear for years found their voices again. The trial hit national news. Abigail's evidence and Jake's videos put Margaret away for 15 years. The HOA reformed real elections, real transparency. The resort deal collapsed, investors bailed, and Blackridge stayed as my grandmother wanted, a true community, not some tyrant's playground. 6 months later, I'm sipping coffee with Abigail, the mountains glowing gold outside my repaired cabin. Margaret Voss is serving time, her empire dissolved. Our HOA now meets in her old house, a real community center. Sometimes the good guys win, especially when they've got receipts, cameras, and a grandmother who believed in keeping records. Ever feel trapped by someone hiding behind rules to ruin your peace? That helpless anger when authority twists into abuse. If you've been there, you know how sweet it is to see justice win, especially when it's broadcast for the world to see. So, tell me, where do you draw the line between rules and freedom? Was justice served, or did we go too far? Drop your thoughts below. Community justice, HOA nightmares, I want to hear your stories.